Beat 2, insurance and finance snap. War risk premiums don't climb, they lurch. Brokers refresh their portals and watch today's quote turn into a moving target. A voyage that cost a few $1,000s in extra war cover yesterday now needs 6 figures up front, paid before sailing, with exclusions that read like tripwires. P&I clubs convene ad hoc calls to cap exposure per incident, then ask reinsurers if their retrocession layers still stand. Reinsurers push back, narrowing aggregates by geography. Capacity shrinks by the hour. Without that cover, a loaded hull isn't cargo, it's liability. Banks that finance it know this. Documentary trade, the dull paperwork that makes the world spin, runs on letters of credit and trust in predictable voyages. Compliance teams aren't poetic, they score risks. With uncertainty concentrated inside a grid of coordinates, they flag everything touching those coordinates. That means bills of lading get extra conditions. Steamship guarantees get questioned. A trader's well-oiled workflow turns into a scavenger hunt for approvals. Freight rates don't just rise, they bifurcate. Owners with vessels outside the hotspot quote one number. Owners with ships already nearby quote another, padded with danger pay for crews and premiums for insurance that may vanish mid-voyage. Charterers scramble for safe tonnage and overpay because certainty is now a product. Some owners switch to voyage only, no options, to avoid being trapped by floating risk. Flexibility goes first. Refiners feel the whip in their P&L, not their conscience. Margins depend on crude quality, freight, and timing. With freight exploding and prompt barrels scarce, crack spreads wobble. A refinery configured for sour grades faces a cruel choice: run lighter crudes and upset unit balances, or cut rates and preserve yields. Some choose self-preservation. They dial down units preemptively, knowing restarting costs less than scrambling for the wrong feedstock. Analysts will call it prudence. Operators will call it fear. In a glass-fronted office far from the Gulf, a Midwestern refinery scheduler watches inventory clocks slide from green to amber. The heavier barrels slated to arrive next week now carry a maybe. He considers swapping in domestic light sweet, but that shifts gasoline and diesel output out of sync with contracts. He rings a broker, hedges cracks he never planned to touch, and pays a premium to hold optionality. It feels like buying time with nickels that weigh a pound. And while physical players hesitate, derivatives sprint. Futures volume surges in near months, spreads stretch as front-end scarcity bleeds into calendar structure. Options smile, skews harden. Those cheap out-of-the-money calls you ignored last week now cost a fortune. Clearinghouses raise initial margin. It's math, not punishment. Higher volatility requires bigger buffers. Margin clerks place calls. One weaker merchant, thinly capitalized and long prompt freight exposure, sells liquid positions into a falling bid to meet cash demands. That sale widens the hole. Banks retrench with muscle memory from past shocks. Counterparty credit limits shrink for firms with Middle East concentration. Trade finance desks slap, temporarily suspended, on new LCs involving Gulf load ports, then carve out narrow exceptions for oil majors with full recourse guarantees. Smaller traders, who move niche grades on thin balance sheets, find doors closed. The market quietly loses the middle layer that often balances price dislocations. With fewer intermediaries, price discovery gets jagged. Insurers publish circulars that are technically guidance but function like law. Geographic boxes define the high-risk zone. Warranties require notification before entering. Some policies add held covered clauses contingent on additional premium and underwriter consent. Mariners know what that means. Clear every step or risk post-loss disputes. Owners start routing vessels to loiter at anchorage outside the box, churning fuel and time while lawyers exchange emails. The sea becomes a waiting room with billion-dollar patience. Freight indices go vertical. World-scale flat rates were yesterday's assumptions. Today's reality is negotiated in urgent calls. Aframax and Suezmax rates surge first, then the VLCCs catch up as owners realize scarcity isn't about size, it's about route. Charterers accept last voyage clauses, granting owners the right to refuse repeats, which kills forward planning. If you can't lock in tonnage past a single trip, your supply chain shrinks to a week-long horizon. Meanwhile, LNG is a different kind of brittle. The ships are specialized, the cargo time-sensitive, the buyers often power utilities. A halt in cover means immediate pauses. Spot tenders spike, desperate buyers bid cargoes away from industrial users. Gas to oil switching rumors push fuel oil and diesel higher, dragging refining margins into fresh confusion. Power desks call treasurers for emergency credit headroom to chase molecules at any price. Treasurers ask banks. Banks, staring at VAR models lighting up, say come back tomorrow. Cross-trading floors, risk managers widen value risk thresholds intraday, then cap them as realized volatility outpaces yesterday's assumptions. Some funds running risk parity strategies de-risk automatically as cross-asset volatility climbs. They sell equities, long bonds, commodities, whatever calms the model. That selling aggravates moves elsewhere. The oil shock bleeds into credit spreads and stock indices, not because fundamentals changed, but because the plumbing forces it. Letters of indemnity, those quiet instruments that paper over missing documents, become taboo. Nobody wants contingent liability when every contingency looks real. Banks insist on clean documents before release. Vessels arrive off discharge ports and wait because a clerk, 3 time zones away, won't stamp a form without a supervisor's nod. The cost of waiting climbs into 6 figures per day, per ship. Demurrage claims start drafting themselves. Crew managers step into the finance story. They demand war bonus pay and the right to refuse transits. Unions circulate advisories. If crews balk, ships don't move, regardless of price. Owners face the optics of pushing sailors into risk. Insurers read that as heightened likelihood of human error in a tense corridor. Premiums reflect it. A loop of cost and caution tightens around the strait like a tourniquet. Refining cracks show their teeth. Diesel spikes relative to gasoline as freight and backup power drive demand. Jet differentials reflect route detours and cautious tankering. Petrochemical margins compress as naphtha tracks crude higher. A few refiners throttle catalytic crackers and hydrocrackers to manage hydrogen and sulfur balances, defending hardware over throughput. Shareholders won't love the numbers, but valves and catalysts live to run another day. On the policy side, central banks watch break-even inflation and financial conditions. They aren't firefighting oil supply, but they can calm funding markets. Swap lines chatter begins. Repo windows stay open. Meanwhile, sovereign wealth funds with energy exposure pivot portfolios, selling what's correlated to buy what's distressed, often amplifying intraday swings. The feedback is mechanical, not emotional, and it's relentless. Then comes the quiet killer. Liquidity in physical paper dries up. Platts windows, dated Brent assessments, Dubai partials, these obscure arenas where prices are actually made, see fewer bids and offers. A single aggressive print can set benchmarks that reprice billions of contracts. With so many players sidelined by risk control, the ones left wield outsized influence. Price formation becomes fragile. Everyone knows it. Nobody wants to admit they're trading ghosts. By afternoon, the shape of the crisis is clear. Insurance capacity is constrained, not collapsed. Finance is functioning, but with sand in the gears. Freight is available but conditional. That combination turns commerce into a sequence of ifs. If cover holds, if banks approve, if crews agree, if ports allow. Each if carries a fee. Stack enough fees and trades do clear. That's how an hour of risk becomes a week of stoppage and a month of bills. Beat 3, the geography of denial. To see how denial works, zoom in on the lanes themselves. The traffic separation scheme threads 2 narrow ribbons through a wider sea, inbound on one side, outbound on the other, with a slim buffer. Depth soundings herd the heaviest hulls into predictable tracks. When a VLCC draws 20 meters, choice vanishes. You sail where the chart says you can, at speeds that keep your rudder biting. That predictability is a gift, until someone decides to weaponize it. Mines don't need to carpet the seabed to matter. A handful moored along the edge of a lane, or influence mines seeded near a bend, create dilemmas. You can't see them from a bridge wing. You rely on minesweeps and assurances that take time. Fast boats add noise, small, agile craft darting close to hulls, forcing evasive maneuvers that are dangerous in confined waters. Drones raise the ceiling of risk. A pilotless quad with a shaped charge is cheap and unnerving. A one-way aerial drone can threaten from angles ships can't defend without escorts. None of this has to sink anything. It just has to inject uncertainty into a corridor too tight for improvisation. Here's where geometry turns subtle. The chokepoint has chokepoints within it, bends, shoals, and convergence zones where streams of traffic compress. A single disabled hull at one of these nodes can force the rest into the buffer, which is fine on a calm day, reckless on a tense one. Allisions, ship-to-ship bumps, are rare in open water, more likely when a captain's mental bandwidth is already consumed by threat scanning. You don't need a blockade when you can raise the risk of a nudge high enough that insurers treat the whole segment as off-limits. Salvage doesn't ride to the rescue on a stopwatch. Before a tug lays a line, surveyors must understand damage, draft, stability, and weather. If there's a suspicion of mines, salvage crews need clearance from naval teams. Every minute burns bunker fuel and money. The owner wants refloat, the insurer wants caution, the Navy wants safety, the market wants movement. That negotiation happens over VHF, sat phones, and secure emails while ships circle at anchor and freight ticks higher. Asymmetric math governs everything. It costs little to harass. It costs a fortune to assure. A handful of skiffs with radios can force dozens of deep-sea hulls to slow. A rumor of a minefield can freeze traffic long before a sonar sweep verifies anything. Meanwhile, maintaining escorts, airborne surveillance, and minesweeping is capital-intensive and politically fraught. Each hour of uncertainty pushes the system toward the most conservative choice: don't sail. Unknown to most viewers, the rulebook nudges the same direction. A captain who proceeds into suspected danger risks, voiding cover under navigation warranties. P&I Club guidance leans conservative because post-loss disputes are brutal. Reinsurers add conditions that effectively treat ambiguity as a denial of passage. Ambiguity is cheaper to create than to resolve. It's the most efficient weapon in a narrow sea. On the bridge of a salvage tug, the debate sounds like a bank credit meeting. A master with 30 years at sea leans over a chart where the choke narrows to a pinch. He's got a disabled product tanker half aground near the edge of the lane, a faint oil sheen, and a rumor of objects in the water ahead. The naval liaison can't confirm or deny mines until a sweep runs. The owner wants a pull before the tide turns. The insurer wants a risk assessment that won't exist for another 4 hours. Every stakeholder hears a different clock ticking. Minutes burn cash. The tug's day rate climbs past 5 figures. A second tug is inbound, but its crew refuses to enter a potential mined area without hazard pay and written guarantees. The salvage master considers a soft pull, low bollard pull to avoid tearing the casualty's hull. That takes longer. Longer means more time for currents to shift and anchors to creep. The radio crackles with a port notice, traffic density elevated, caution advised. Everybody reads it as code for stay clear. Meanwhile, the traffic separation scheme becomes a parking lot. AIS shows rings of ships at anchor just outside the designated risk box. Those circles expand as newcomers arrive and keep a respectful distance. Each anchored hull needs swing room. Add current, wind, and human error, and anchorage becomes its own hazard. A scrape at anchor can cascade into 2 damaged ships and another insurance headache. Captains increase CPA margins. That spreads the waiting fleet even wider. Asymmetric ledger grows uglier. Drones don't need to hit to have effect. A few sightings at altitude near the lanes force authorities to publish advisories. A single hull with a scorch mark photographed from shore can cycle through social media before officials craft a sentence. Markets react to the image, not the investigation. Owners call security consultants, who update threat matrices and recommend avoiding the corridor until clarity improves. Clarity rarely improves faster than fear. Here's where the human factor multiplies the geography. Pilots who have threaded these waters for decades know the muscle memory that keeps ships safe. They also know how quickly one hesitant helm order in a pinch becomes a near miss. On tense days, even routine maneuvers feel loaded. A crosscurrent at a bend isn't just physics, it's risk to a career. The pilot's voice tightens. He asks for more engine earlier. The ship obeys, but the room for error shrinks. Insurance language turns into operational doctrine. Held covered subject to additional premium and prior notice, reads like a green light with strings. In practice, it's a yellow that never turns green because the prior notice becomes a Q and the additional premium becomes a blank check. Owners instruct masters to loiter. Masters tell pilots they'll wait for daylight. Daylight brings glare and wind. The excuses align with prudence. At the perimeter, naval escorts begin shaping the space, but escorts don't widen the lane or deepen the water. They deter overt moves. They can't erase uncertainty about invisible threats. Minesweeping takes patience and pattern. Each cleared segment is a relief map of where you still shouldn't go. Convoys form, which boosts perceived safety but reduces flexibility. Miss a convoy window, and your demurrage clock keeps bleeding. Even successful assurance has limits. A confirmed mine neutralized today doesn't guarantee tomorrow. A drone shot down this morning doesn't prevent another at dusk. Assurance forces accept an endless game of proving a negative. No threat here now. Commerce hates that sentence. The path of least regret remains to wait. The market reads waiting as closure and prices accordingly. Then there's the physics of a single casualty. A laden hull loses power at a bend. Its rudder angle freezes 5 degrees to port. Momentum carries it across the lane. A soft grounding, not dramatic, but enough to foul the fairway. The crew drops anchors to hold position. One bites, one drags. A tug arrives, tests the line and stands off. Survey needed. Tension at the fairlead creaks. No one wants a parted line and a lawsuit. The geometry that once made navigation easy now traps everyone in a slow puzzle. The conclusion writes itself in the logbooks before it hits the news. Uncertainty equals closure. Insurers don't insure ambiguity. Ports don't authorize risk they can't quantify. Captains don't sail into maybes with steel and crews they know by name. In a waterway this tight, denial isn't a wall, it's a fog. And in that fog, the safe choice is to stop, which is exactly the point. Beat 4, refining, power, and industry hit the wall. While hulls wait at anchor and insurance emails stall, refineries start counting hours. Europe leans on Middle Eastern sour grades to balance its slates. Asia leans even more. Japan and South Korea plan around Gulf cargoes like clockwork. India's coastal refineries are wired into Qatar's LNG and Saudi and Iraqi crudes. Even when alternatives exist, they aren't plug and play. Hardware is stubborn. Economics are stricter. A refinery is not a generic factory. It's tuned to a crude diet. Sour barrels, heavier, higher sulfur, feed hydrocrackers and cokers built to squeeze diesel and jet from tough molecules. Switch to light sweet and you get more gasoline, less diesel, and sulfur units sit idle while octane management goes sideways. The metal inside doesn't care about headlines. Catalysts demand the environment they were designed for. Push the wrong feedstock, and you invite fouling, corrosion, and unplanned downtime that outlasts any crisis. So schedulers triage. If the heavy slates from the Gulf wobble, they hunt for similar barrels. Latin American sours, West African blends with caveats, Russian grades if politics allow. Each substitution carries a discount or a premium that moves margins by dollars per barrel. Freight multiplies the pain. The longer route around Africa or across oceans eats the advantage you thought you found. Some plants decide to run lighter and cut rates, protecting equipment over throughput. It looks conservative until diesel cracks spike and your product slate mismatches the market. LNG doesn't even pretend to be flexible. Power systems that rely on gas live cargo to cargo. Storage is thin. A missed delivery shows up as pressure falling on a pipeline and a control room pushing peaker plants to life. When LNG through Hormuz slows, utilities bid for spot cargoes that barely exist. Qatar's portfolio is large but contracted. Diverting a ship means breaking another promise or paying a penalty. A buyer in North Asia opens a tender. A rival in South Asia counters with a higher bid. A richer utility wins. A poorer one fires backup fuel oil. Diesel generators cough back to life at industrial sites that thought they'd retired them. Gas-to-power shifts ripple through fuels. With LNG scarce, coal looks practical again wherever it's still permitted. Fuel oil becomes a bridge fuel for grids under strain. That move pushes refiners to reallocate residual streams, changing run plans in days when they prefer to plan months. Suddenly, high-sulfur fuel oil is valuable, and desulfurization units are strategic levers rather than compliance tools. When grids wobble, policy tolerances widen. A temporary waiver for emissions sneaks through to keep lights on. Markets front-run the waiver. Industrial users make the hardest cuts first because their demand is flexible in theory and expensive in reality. Petrochemical crackers tied to naphtha C feedstock costs jump with crude. Some swing to LPG if they can, but LPG prices follow the same panic. Margins compress. Fertilizer plants face a harsh equation. Ammonia is gas turned into food. If gas prices blow out, you shut a unit rather than print losses with every ton. That choice travels down the calendar to farmers who haven't bought fertilizer yet, and to the grain markets that price expected yield months ahead. The price change arrives before the planting season does. A steel mill with electric arc furnaces watches power bids spike and trims shifts. Cement kilns that fuel switch to petcoke feel their costs rise as refiners cut runs that produce petcoke in the first place. It looks like a small circle until trucks get pricier miles away. Freight depends on diesel, and diesel depends on refineries configured to the very crudes now stuck behind a traffic jam of risk. You can see the chain, link by link. A trading floor in Singapore, an Asian utility bids for a last LNG cargo in a window that already looks impossible. Their price would have won last week. Today, a wealthier buyer in Northeast Asia lifts it by $1 and takes the ship. The loser calls a fuel broker about low-sulfur fuel oil for peakers, then calls the regulator with a heads-up. Expect higher tariffs next month. The regulator asks for a public statement urging conservation. The utility drafts careful language. Behind the words is a scramble. Food doesn't move without nitrogen. Fertilizer isn't a headline until it's late, and then it's too late. A plant in the Middle East cuts rates to conserve gas for power. European buyers, already squeezed by past disruptions, tap warehouses and bid up imports from anywhere. Freight adds insult. The same container ship schedules that rely on cheap bunkers now see bunker costs rise and port calls shuffle. Bulk carriers chase coal and grain routes that pay better. Agricultural traders widen basis to cover uncertainty at origin and destination. A loaf of bread doesn't know why its inputs got expensive, but families will. Back at the refinery, operators pick through run sheet options. You can crank up catalytic crackers to chase gasoline, but diesel is where trucking and backup power are heading. Hydrocrackers want hydrogen, which depends on steam methane reformers that eat gas. If gas gets pricey, hydrogen gets pricey, and sulfur removal gets complicated. Plants with flex find a narrow path, plants without it downshift. Maintenance that was penciled in for next quarter gets brought forward, masking the cut as prudence. The real reason is scarcity. Aviation absorbs pain awkwardly. Jet fuel production sits between gasoline and diesel in the barrel, and it rides airline schedules that can't be rebuilt overnight. Flight planners reroute around conflict zones, adding time and burn. Airlines tank more fuel at safe hubs to avoid uncertain uplift at destinations, which increases weight and burn again. Yields rise. Leisure traffic flexes. Cargo belly space tightens. Airports issue NOTAMs about fuel rationing, just in case. The whisper becomes a line at the counter. Meanwhile, refiner purchasing teams renegotiate with national oil companies that know their leverage. Term cargoes stay, but flexibility clauses disappear. Optional volumes turn into firm commitments with shorter windows. Miss the window and you're out. Spot traders step in with offers that start with, "I can laken next week if you pay me now." The premium is a tax on uncertainty. Every buyer pays it or sits still. Here's where policy collides with physics. Governments urge calm at the pump and promise investigations into price gouging. Retailers point to replacement cost logic. The next truck will cost more, and margins on fuel are thin. Regulators send letters anyway. The signal is for public consumption. The market ignores it. Strategic reserves sit in the background, valuable but not immediate. Crude in a cavern doesn't turn into diesel in a day. Refineries need slate, not slogans. Industrial planners run playbooks written after the last crisis. Tripwires for load shedding, priority lists for power allocation, rotational downtime for large users. Nobody wants to flip them, but they exist for a reason. The emails circulate quietly. Hospitals and water plants sit at the top. Aluminium smelters and data centers start to wonder which column they occupy. Managers draft contingency plans that they hope to delete next week. All this builds before consumers feel it fully. The first clue is a diesel spike at wholesale racks, then a notice from an airline about schedule changes, then a fertilizer purchase order with a new price and a stern payment deadline. Industry takes the blow to cushion households for a week, maybe two. After that, costs leak into everything: food, flights, freight. By the time a family sees the number on a pump, the refinery made the choice days ago, and the utility lost the auction hours before dawn.